All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to call to order this study session of the 2026-2027 Preliminary General Fund Forecast and Budget Priorities, also known as priority setting, to order for the afternoon of February 5th. Tony, would you please call the roll?
Kamei? Here. Campos?
Present.
Tordios?
Here.
Cohen? Here. Ortiz? Mulcahy?
Here.
Dwan?
Here.
Candelas?
Here.
Casey? Here. Foley? Here. Mahan?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. Thank you. I was about to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I realized we don't do that in our study sessions. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to offer a few opening remarks, and then I'll hand things over to our city manager for her opening remarks, and then we'll get to the staff presentation before we go to council discussion and finally public comment at the end of this study session. So I want to just start by thanking City Manager Jennifer McGuire, Assistant City Manager Lee Wilcox, their Deputy City Managers, and the Office of the City Manager's Budget Director, Jim Shannon, Betty Young, Claudia Chang, and the entire team, I think most of whom are here. I want to recognize the extraordinary work that staff has put in over the last several months behind the scenes, not maybe obvious to us in public meetings, but the team that has been working away really with teams across the organization to prepare for both the mid-year budget review, which we will hear next week, and today's priority setting and all of the budget work that comes ahead. That effort shows, and I want to thank you all for your professionalism, hard work, and commitment to the city. So the purpose of today's session is to hear directly from the City Council about priorities and values that will inform the development of my March budget message and ultimately guide the entire budget process we go through together, culminating in a final adoption of the budget in late June. Today is not about final decisions. It is about general direction and priorities. It's about grounding our next steps in a shared understanding of the fiscal reality we face and the outcomes we want to deliver for our residents. The city manager is preliminarily estimating an ongoing general fund shortfall in fiscal year 26-27 of $55 to $65 million. While I know that the administration will get creative and think critically to identify cost efficiencies as they're already doing and we've already supported, we will have a lot of work to do to balance our budget. And by the way, that work by the administration isn't just about identifying cost efficiencies, it's also optimizing existing services so that we can make them more efficient without losing quality, generating new revenue sources. But collectively, as we head into this process, we will collectively have to discuss service reductions, which requires us to have an honest conversation about our capacity and the trade-offs we're willing to make. None of the necessary trade-offs will be easy, and none should be approached lightly. Our city manager will be very focused on minimizing community and workforce impacts. But service impacts are likely, and today gives us an opportunity to align on principles and approaches for responsibly and sustainably addressing this shortfall while maintaining focus on what matters most to our community. Even in the face of these fiscal constraints, our responsibility remains the same: to deliver tangible and visible results for the more than 1 million people who call San Jose home. That means continuing to prioritize the services that most directly affect residents' daily lives, while also positioning the city for long-term stability and growth. I also want to note that I'm excited to be working with this year's Budget Brown Act group, including Vice Mayor Foley and Council Members Cohen, Kamei, and Tordios. I appreciate their collaboration in this process, but today is really about hearing from the entire council. For today's session, following today's session, there will be multiple additional opportunities for both City Council and the general public to provide input. These include the city service budget study sessions, budget town halls that I'll be leading across the city, and the public hearings on the March and June messages. Today is one step in that longer process, but it is a critical one. The feedback shared in this chamber today will shape how we move forward, how we balance difficult choices, and how we stay accountable to the people we serve. I'm excited, colleagues, to delve into the 7 questions at the end of the presentation and confident that they give us the structure we need to gather actionable information on what issues matter most to you and your district. So I thank you all for your engagement. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our city manager, Jennifer McGuire, for some remarks before we get to the staff presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mayor and City Council members, for the opportunity to begin the first of many meaningful discussions on the 26-27 budget development process. Our goal here today is to allow for clear and meaningful input from the City Council to inform the Mayor's development of his March budget message for fiscal year 26-27. This, in turn, gives formal direction to me for the preparation of my 26-27 proposed budget documents that will be released on around May 1st. To help set the stage for the conversation, we will review major general fund revenue and cost drivers, share information on community priorities as expressed in recent survey data, review focus area alignment, core services and budget programs and organizational risks, and offer some preliminary budget balancing strategy considerations. Before I turn it over to Budget Director Jim Shannon and then Assistant City Manager Lee Wilcox to get us started, I want to acknowledge up front that while there are no easy answers here and there will be real service trade-offs to consider, you have an extremely talented and thoughtful team across departments who will make every effort to be creative and strategic to minimize impacts to our community and to our employees. We will absolutely be looking for efficiencies, service optimizations, business model changes, contractual service reductions, vacant position eliminations, new revenue opportunities, and other low-impact proposals before we recommend significant service cuts and workforce disruptions. I absolutely know we all have the shared goal of ensuring our budget reductions are as invisible to our residents and businesses as possible, and that employee layoffs are minimized to the extent possible. That is certainly a very important tenet for me. While all ideas are welcome, what we need from the City Council is a discussion about service priorities, what type of services should be preserved, what types of services should be used for reduction, what types of criteria should be considered when considering reductions, or in very limited instances, what are some targeted improvements we should be looking at over the next year that will come in with trade-offs in this budget? Engaging in these types of questions today will not only help inform the Mayor's March budget message development, which you all vote on in the mid-March timeframe, but should also ensure that the suite of budget proposals that are included in my proposed budget are not surprises at all. In other words, we may not like the reductions that will need to be included, but we will have a shared understanding of the priorities that guided their inclusion, and no one should be taken off guard by their inclusion. Again, I very much know that these are not easy conversations. I know that nobody wants to be here today and talk about budget reductions. We'd much rather talk about budget additions and what more we can do for our community. But I want to assure you, I have been through these situations many, many, many times before, and so have many of our budget office and department staff, and we are prepared to meet this challenge. With thoughtful conversations and hard work, we will get through this together as one team, and I mean that very sincerely. With that, I'll hand it over to Jim to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Jim Shannon, City's Budget Director. Just one more shout out to the Budget Office team and my management team, who I made sit in the front row, so thank you very much for doing that. Here is the agenda that Jennifer talked through, and so we'll just jump right into it here. And we're going to try just give like a little high-level overview of the grounding for what's in the 26-27 preliminary general fund forecast and why we have a shortfall. And we start with the economic conditions, and just this graph kind of is the key one to think about, is that our local economy really right now is not conducive to revenue growth. The biggest influence for general fund revenues is job growth, and jobs have been pretty much stagnant. And so when jobs are stagnant, the revenue growth it lags, and so that's what we've certainly seen here. Office vacancies also are remaining high, and that commercial sector is kind of weighing down our property tax valuation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Residential real estate prices are sort of holding steady. They've slightly decreased a little bit, but we have seen the number of transactions go down a little bit, and the days on market have gone up a little bit. So again, some softness there. Private development activity is up from last year, but I wouldn't consider that strong. So it's a bright spot, but not bright enough to offset everything else. And this slide is showing the overall preliminary general fund revenue estimates, the major categories that we have. I'm going to talk more about property tax, sales tax, and our utility and franchise fees, which are our largest ones here. So we'll delve into those in a minute. But we also have as a major category our business tax, which is inclusive of card room taxes, cannabis taxes, and our general business tax and disposal facility tax. We've got a number of licenses, permits, fees, rates, and charges that reimburse for services rendered. That's about $55 million. A number of transfers and reimbursements that reimburses the general fund for work performed for special and capital funds and other reimbursements that those different funds provide for general fund work. And then sort of we have a slew of other smaller revenue categories that are very important, but don't rise to the level of the other ones, including a telephone line tax. We've got interest earnings. We've got our TOT taxes and a number of others that comprise the remaining 8% of our general fund revenues. Driving in a little bit to property tax, which is our largest. City gets around 14%, the first two slices there, of every dollar that we have for that the property owner pays. They're broken up into those major into the categories you see on the right-hand side for secured, unsecured, and a few other categories. We're going to talk mostly about the secured, which is the largest component. And three main categories. This is our general secured revenue category. This is the main component for the valuation for all property. We've got a segment here called Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, ERAF. This is the component of property tax that is initially there's a bucket that goes to fund school funding. Once that bucket overflows, the overflow gets distributed to the various municipalities in California, and the estimate is about $53 million for that portion of the revenue. However, that is at risk. So the state sort of disagrees with how the county calculates that, and so that is part of litigation that is currently underway. Potentially at risk there is about $9 to $10 million on an ongoing basis and $35 to $39 million on a one-time potential clawback. So that's something that we've been keeping our eye on, and it's probably going to be coming to a head here over the next fiscal year. So we'll have to watch that closely. And then we've got the final category here on this slide is our successor agency to the redevelopment agency, our SARA. So there's a slice of property tax increment that the city gives after the other expenses, mostly bond payments, are made regarding the improvements that were done in the SARA area, or in the old redevelopment agency area. And that is $24 million. Notably, that's down. So this is the first year in 25-26 where it's going to be sort of lower than the previous year. So it's actually going to be down a couple $1 million from where it was prior year, which is an indicator of how weak the commercial sector is. So SARA is mostly commercial properties. And so I think we are starting to see sort of the drag down a little bit of the commercial across the whole property tax category. Looking at our overall revenue estimates, I think it kind of bears out that we're seeing it grow at a slower rate. The annual growth of valuation is capped at 2% unless that property changes hands. So if properties are changing hands more slowly, or if some of those properties on the commercial side are changing hands for a lower value, that's dragging down the rate of growth. So we're still growing there. We're just growing at a slower rate than we had been in the past. You can see we had some pretty strong growth there a few years ago. That's been tapering off, and we expect that tapering to continue. And of course, this is our biggest revenue category, so we got to be careful. We can't underestimate this one because it means so much to the city, but we also can't overestimate it because if we get too far behind where property tax is, it really spells a lot of problems for us on a going forward basis. Then looking at sales tax, our second largest category, the two main slices that San Jose gets is the Bradley Burns portion. That's the main sort of general sales tax. That's the 1% of the 10%. And then our local district-only measure is our 0.25% local tax. That is actually set to expire in 2031. So that was approved for a 15-year basis. That expires in 2031. It brings about $60 million of revenue to the city. So not in this 5-year forecast, but in the next 5-year forecast, you see that revenue sort of coming out because it automatically expires, and we'd have to go back to the voters to reauthorize that. break out by the different components of our general sales tax. So this is we talk about general sales tax a lot for economic data because that's where we have the best data to analyze. And so we've got the different economic sectors: business to business, general, retail, transportation, food products, and construction. And then we have our county pool, which is primarily generated by online sales transactions. For most of these categories over the last couple of years, you've seen a decline, with the exception of the county pool, which is higher, and food products. But the other categories have experienced some weaknesses here. And so, again, it kind of more of a reflection sort of the overall economy. If we're not growing a lot of jobs, we're not growing in a lot of purchase power. Looking at our revenue estimates, again, it looks like I just want to show some of the historical growth and sort of where we've been. The last few years, sales tax has really ended year over year. In 25-26, we actually do expect to meet our revenue estimate, so it's performing as expected, but it's not rallying to offset the slowdown in the other major categories that we have. And so, also, our first quarter growth was pretty strong, but we think that a lot of that was due to sort of one-time corrections in comparison with the prior fiscal year. So we were really only anticipating some small economic growth on a going forward basis, including in 26-27. The revenue amount looks a little bit lower there because beginning next fiscal year, our estimates reflect an adjustment to sales tax revenues, but we're going to offset those by our revenue loss reserve. So it looks like it's going to be lower, but that lower amount is going to be offset by plans we've already put in place to offset for that lower sales tax revenue. And then finally, just the last big category I want to talk about is a combination of utility tax and franchise fees. These generally reflect the cost for electricity, gas, water, telephone. So there's either a tax or a surcharge on the bill related to those services. It's been a pretty strong growth category, obviously, since we've been all paying increased rates when we pay our bills. That is, it hurts the pocketbook, but it has been good to the city's general fund revenue, which has also been beneficial because it is a non-economically sensitive category. So it's really more susceptible to what's going on with rates and what's going on with the weather, as opposed to how the economy is performing. So it's a nice buffer there. But we do expect those revenue growths to slow off because we have seen rates leveling off. Again, that's a good thing generally, but it does have revenue implications for the general fund. Now we're going to transition to the expenditure side and want to just talk through a few of the main components here. And of course, this is, again, all these numbers are going to be preliminary, but it does give a sense of scale here. And so all of the departmental, non-departmental costs, like most California cities, we spend, a lot of our general fund on police and fire because those are the services that the city has to provide and no one else does. And so a big chunk of the city's general fund goes to police and fire. And then you can see Parks and Rec is our third largest, then Public Works and Transportation, and then all the way on down. So we put this there sort of as a sense of scale. And then when we break it down by the different types of general fund expenditures, about 76% of the ongoing general fund budget is related to people. So we provide services, people provide those services, so that's the majority of what our costs are. And you can see there between salaries and overtime, health and other fringe, and retirement contributions. And then we break out the other component, which is our non-personal equipment, which are like supplies, materials, contractual services, citywide other, which is sort of a broad category of multi-departmental expenditures like workers' compensation, our San Jose Best program is in there, SJ Works, SJ Learns, things like that. We've got our component for citywide of interim housing. We've got our contingency reserve, which is supposed to be 3% of our ongoing general fund expenditures by city council policy. And then we've got a number of transfers there and only a shockingly small amount for capital expenditures. Looking a little bit more closely at personal services, wanted to show this because it's the biggest cost driver for the city is wages and salaries and benefits and retirement. So the cost of people is our largest driver here, and so wanted to show what that's been doing over the last several years. And so you can see if you look at the total cost that we have in the general fund, that's increased by about 20%, 22% over the last 4 or so years. Our position count, though, has only gone up slightly, and so it's a reflection of we have to pay people to do the work, and those costs go up, and so that's one of the key drivers of the general fund. And the key component of personal services is retirement costs, and we always like to show this, show the history of where we've been and the pain that the organization went through in the late aughts and the early tens. when we had to wrestle with the skyrocketing retirement costs. And so that has been sort of very much stabilized, but it's still stabilized as a much higher percentage of our general fund and has, implications on general fund capacity to do other work. I would say the good news is, though, a lot of those retirement costs is reflected in our unfunded actuarial liability. It's kind of like we've got a really big mortgage that we've been paying down to pay off that UAL. And the good news is we are sort of at the top and should be going on the downward slope. It's going to vary depending on what actually happens with the market and what actually happens with the assumptions by the retirement boards. But this is the going forward projection for the police and fire pension system, which is primarily general fund. So I like to show this one. Federated doesn't look quite as good, but only about 45% of retirement costs are federated. So in the general fund. So, and I would do want to note retirement contributions next year are higher than we previously projected because we are not going to get the benefit of pre-funding retirement contributions given where the market's at and the restrictions that the boards place on our pre-funding contributions. And because of recent labor agreements, the board is assuming some higher wage inflation than they had in the past, and that's having an impact too on our costs. And then just briefly on those other costs, which are minor, but they are important. We do spend a lot of time trying to figure out what they are. So our non-personal equipment, we do expect energy costs to go up based on usage, water costs to be increasing, and we do set aside some amount of money in the base budget every year that we not automatically given, but we assume, and we go through this really grueling process to justify what should be increased. So we've got estimated $2 million for IT application subscriptions, facility services, and various contractual service adjustments, but we have a very detailed process where we review all of that one by one. Committed additions are capital projects that will come online later that will have operating maintenance costs associated with them. The two largest in the out years will be Fire Station 36 and Columbus Park. So that'll increase from about $1 million in 26-27 to about $9 million 5 years later. And then going back again to citywide, the largest component there is our interim housing portfolio. And so we have those out there as $17 million in 26-27. And as we've been doing for a number of years, we've been forecasting stepping in. So as the amount of external funding fluctuates and is being spent down, we're ramping up our general fund contribution to be able to make sure we have a fully sustainable system. Those contribution amounts are going to vary based on external funding that we receive, and so we're always very active in trying to make sure we're maximizing the amount of external funding and our continued cost management. So you'll see the full interim housing forecast as part of our 5-year forecast that we released at the very beginning of March. You'll see a more detailed breakout of that. And then we also make sure that we've got some cost of living increases for those community-based organizations that we fund as part of citywide also. And so because of that, so we basically have revenue that is slowing up, and we have expenditures that are still growing. And that imbalance on an ongoing basis is what's driving our shortfall ranging from $55 to $65 million. You know, a preliminary look at year 2 shows an additional shortfall of about half again as much, although we haven't spent a lot of time yet on the out years. We're going to start that next week. We're going to relook at everything as part of the forecast, including a more detailed look at the out years. For the preliminary, it's based on very limited data. We don't have all of our retirement data. There's lots of other things that we need to sort of build in there. And so we'll be doing a detailed analysis over these next 3 weeks. But that forecast does not include other important stuff like any costs associated with unmet deferred infrastructure, any maintenance needs, any one-time services or programs, that are currently funded in the general fund but automatically sort of come out. That number is much, much smaller than it used to be, but still needs to be considered. And if we want to do anything new for new service level enhancements, that's also not in that projected shortfall either. So with that, I want to turn this back over to Lee for some community perspectives.
Thank you, Jim. Mayor and Council, Lee Wilcox, Assistant City Manager. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on community perceptions in the context of what we're hearing from residents and also what it means for our organization moving forward, but also what it's done over the last few years, and then quickly shift to kind of organizationally how we're managed and how we're starting to think about this year's budget from an organizational perspective. So most of this council has seen this slide before. The survey gives us one of our clearest signals of what matters most to our community over the last several years, without a lot of significant changes. Year after year, cost of living, homelessness, housing affordability dominate, underscoring what residents see as persistent and systemic issues in our community. These issues compound each other. When cost burdens rise, so does housing instability and homelessness. Public trust increases when budget decisions reflect residents' lived experience. This is a core principle in democratic responsiveness in our government that is difficult to achieve with so many needs and a thinly staffed organization. However, this council over the last several years with the administration has been able to focus on that responsiveness. This showed last week when Joe Royce showed us the annual city services report, where we've seen increases in all of these areas that are on the slide ahead. In addition, as part of our transit and occupancy tax item next week, the city conducted polling, and while it's not community polling, that is voter polling, we saw increases of 13% from last year to this year on as San Jose headed in the right direction, and 16% over the prior year, and being able to align priorities. These results are different because they're not about reacting to individual complaints anymore. They're about proactively aligning strategic investments and organizational capacity with the challenges people face every day in our community. Public Policy Institute of California at UC Berkeley confirms what our own internal data shows. Homelessness, housing, and safety remain top-tier concerns for residents. There's also increasing anxiety about visual blight, graffiti, overgrown public spaces, because these signal breakdowns in basic order. Looking within this data, these concerns do span geographic and demographic groups, including cutting across all age groups, income, and race within our city. This gives us a clear direction on where we should prioritize. Our focus areas weren't created in a vacuum. Actually came from the mayoral transition and questions from the mayor and councils, what can we do to put the administration in the best foot forward, which Jennifer's response was more focused. And it came from this council making difficult decisions to put limited resources behind what our community was talking about at City Hall. We're not just funding programs, but building staff capacity to achieve visible results here in areas where residents expect to see leadership and progress. While we share many concerns with Californians overall, the intensity and scale of these issues are greater in San Jose. Housing pressures, for example, are more acute here due to our income to rent ratios, cost of land, and construction pipeline delays. What that means for us as a city is that we don't have the ability to take generic solutions. We need to tailor solutions and programs for our individual needs here. What this data shows is that residents also look to local government for visible results. They may look to Washington, D.C. or Sacramento and vote on their preferences for candidates based off of individual positions or democratic values that all of you need to balance. But in local government, they're typically electing leaders to move something forward in their city. This raises the stakes for us to maintain both credibility but capability as an organization. And we need to design local interventions that are both bold enough to meet local conditions but flexible enough for us to adapt in our changing environment year over year. The most recent satisfaction ratings drawn from the annual report on city services are the strongest we've seen since before the pandemic. Every year, every service measured showed an upward trend in resident satisfaction over the prior year. Several core services saw the most significant improvements, especially cleaning up illegal dumping, providing emergency medical services, creating a more vibrant downtown, and improving animal control. These services directly interact with how people feel in their daily lives. These are a result of sustained attention and resource alignment in well-established operational areas throughout the city. In many cases, they represent the work of frontline teams that have implemented practical improvements without major funding. This reinforces an important point that Jennifer brought up earlier. Even in constrained budgets, in constrained budget environments, visible results are possible when conditions are well aligned, staff are supported, systems are functioning, and the organization remains focused. At the same time, these gains remain extremely fragile. Without continued staff capacity and coordination across departments and agencies, we know from past experience how quickly service quality can decline, and progress here is reversible. Luckily, our our council-approved focus areas actually mirror the top concerns of our community. This provides a rare level of clarity for us. We don't need to guess where to aim. The public and the policy are actually in sync here. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a result of this council making difficult decisions amongst the many needs in our community. I should say, however, alignment doesn't necessarily mean capacity. We must decide how to scale our focus to match what we can sustain operationally. Focus doesn't always mean funding everything. It means choosing the things that matter most and doing them well. It also means that we should keep evaluating our impact, refining service models, and rethinking delivery systems so that we can continue to maximize every single dollar. An example of this is our city manager's directed service delivery optimization work plan, where we're pulling out specific core services and programs where we believe additional gains can be made to make it efficient and optimized. Another example is conversations we've had for you for the last 2 years around reducing unsheltered homelessness, where for the last 2 years we've been focused on additional funding and growing capacity in our system. Without additional revenue coming in, we will shift from capacity building to one of optimization and looking at a system that is very efficient so that the throughput matters. So while it won't require a whole lot of additional extra funding, staff attention and leadership will be greatly needed. And that does bring me to our favorite triangle slides, the 574 and 253 now. Our 5 council focus areas. Just want to give background. We as staff don't view these as traditional line item programs. They reflect complex strategic priorities identified by the council that require a different kind of work, not just additional funding. These efforts often involve standing up new services, piloting new approaches, or coordinating across jurisdictions and different systems. They're still under development in many cases, which means we are designing for both efficiency and effectiveness from the outset. Staff capacity plays a huge role here. Many of these efforts stretch across departments, but more importantly, stretch across different agencies. So the reliance on time to be able to provide coordination, innovation, and rapid learning for leadership teams and frontline staff is important. With resource constraints in this year's budget, we'll need to sequence and manage how much focus area activity this organization can support at any given time. This is not a matter of willingness, but one of bandwidth for the organization, aligning the scope of strategic initiatives and actual delivery capacity. So we get to the bottom half of our triangle. This is what we refer to as the backbone of our city. They are established, mature, and run with discipline, our core services and programs. These include essential ongoing services such as water, sewer systems, libraries, parks, debt service, and administrative support. Generally, these services operate with a high degree of competency and consistency. Performance is strong. Efficiency gains can still be available, and they're explored all the time, especially through process improvement, technology, and workload balancing throughout departments. However, they can't be ignored for long periods of time, or they become larger issues that the community will begin to have concerns about and City Hall will need to address. But constant to focus, or in contrast to council focus areas, these functions are not being reimagined, they're being optimized every day for our community. They provide the stability that allows the organization to absorb and push change elsewhere. While the council focus areas and core services and programs differ in maturity, they share a common dependency: organizational infrastructure and strategic capacity. Risks such as deferred maintenance, limited reserves, and thin staffing in areas like IT, HR, and finance affect both day-to-day operations and strategic initiatives the council may want to explore. These are important functions. These important functions often determine how quickly we can adapt, scale, and maintain performance under pressure. As council considers budget direction this year, understanding these constraints will be helpful to frame what's feasible and where pacing matters. This is ultimately about managing institutional reliance alongside service priorities. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Budget Director Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Lee Wilcox. I'm going to talk through some of our potential budget balancing strategies, but before I do, I want to just give a little historical context. And I know these are slides that many of you all have seen a couple times, but I think it's really important to really show this, is that we've resolved, over the last 20 years, general fund shortfalls exceeding $800 million. So it shows that we're experienced and we can go through this process, and we've got, good systems in place to address it. Another thing, it identifies how revenue constrained we are as an organization, but it also reflects too sort of how challenging it is on a going forward basis to reduce even more, because we've done a lot of the easier stuff and hard stuff, and it can kind of just only gets harder really. So want to provide that perspective as well as this slide. So over the last 25 years almost, we're still not back to the overall position count across all funds that we were in 2001, 2002. Now, we definitely do services differently. We have different business models, and so it's a one-to-one comparison exactly, but we also operate in a much more complex service level environment. And so it's really a reflection of, we have never been able to really restore to where we had been even over 20 years ago. So in looking at our potential budget balancing strategies, we are guided by a number of things, including some key documents. So one is City Council Policy 1-18, which is our guidelines, standards, sort of like our high-level rule book for budgeting. That's updated on a periodic basis as needed for various reasons. We've got our City Council budget priorities. These are really some key principles that ensures a sustainable, comprehensive approach to balancing our budget year in, year out. They were last updated in September 2008. They were created really at a time when the city had been in a terrible shortfall, and it wanted to put in place a structure to make sure that we were never in that place again. And even though we are, having some challenges, we are not in that place where we were, 15 years ago. And it's because, the adherence to some of these principles. We got direction. It's because it's been so long, we did get direction as part of the approval of the June budget message to say, hey, why don't we take a look and refresh that? It's been a little while. And so we do have that. That's part of your materials there. So please take a look at that. We'll probably have a version of that in the city manager's budget request that will come out at the beginning of March for your consideration. And then we've got our budget balancing strategy guidelines. These are our decision-making framework to the administration, how to develop the proposed budget. Those are updated annually. We also recommend those be approved as part of the March budget message. And then, of course, we have the March budget message itself, which is really about the service level priorities, the specific values, the trade-offs to how we get to the balanced budget. A little bit more specific on the policies and the priorities, whereas maybe the prior ones are really more about the structure and the process of how we go about balancing the budget. So I wanted just to point that out there. I want to just, again, reemphasize how critical your perspectives are in this process. There's no silver bullets. There's no easy levers. There's just really a lot of hard work and hard choices. And so I think we're pretty good at and experienced at, figuring out what are our revenue options, what are our cost reduction options, what are performance data to evaluate the proposals. I think we're really good at the nuts and bolts, and we're going to come up with a lot of creative ideas. But we will need from you all those service priorities that are going to be acceptable for some of those trade-offs. And so that will ultimately help us inform what's going to be in the proposed budget. And as we go forward to balance the budget, again, about a holistic approach, that there are a lot of things, as Lee was talking about earlier, as Jennifer referenced in her opening remarks, that sort of go into providing services to the community. Again, this is a framework that stood the test of time, and we've kind of included this in our budget documents for a long time. And it's really important because it's highlighting you have to have a robust service delivery framework to deliver the services that you want to. And key there, we always want to point out we need the support services in our back of house functions, along with the infrastructure, the right service delivery method, talented staff. We got the right performance data, and we make sure it can be delivered sustainably. All those go into us thinking about how we bring forward budget proposals to balance the budget before you. In any given year brings new opportunities for us. So every given year, the departments are going to be looking, the budget office is going to be looking at opportunities to adjust our revenue streams, adjust fees and charges, identify some cost efficiencies, look at redeployment or service reorganization that can generate either more effective services for the same cost or for reduced costs or increased revenues without a service level impact. Like, that is top of mind, and we're going to pursue those first. So I want to just highlight that we are definitely thinking of that. We're just not going automatically to cuts. We're trying to think of everything, and we'll be as creative as possible. But there's limits to that, and so we will have to think about, getting beyond that will require some service reductions. But when we try to figure out which services to cut, we have to realize that only about 2/3 of the general fund is what we would call discretionary. There's about a third of it that is we can't really address, especially in the year in front of us. A lot of that cost is related to our retirement unfunded actuarial liability. We're going to have to pay that regardless of how many folks we have employed currently. There are also a number of revenue offsets. So if we're getting revenues in to do a service, we can't cut that service, then we would lose the revenue too. And there's also certain state required spending that we have to do on certain services. So when we kind of step back and look at it, we really have a smaller slice of the general fund that we can really engage in when we think about budget cuts. Back in December, when we had an idea of what the preliminary forecast would look like, the city manager sent out direction to departments to generate proposals so we could bring forward a balanced budget. We got to get started on that process early. So this is the amount that we are targeting to generate proposals totaling $60 million. Issuing targets by department does not mean we're going to apply reductions uniform. It's a way for us to inform us to generate ideas, to figure out what is the best suite of options we can bring forward to you in alignment with your priorities to balance the budget and make sure that we're meeting the critical needs of our community. Part of this process really is our continued focus on the consideration of racial and social equity, as the decisions we make to cut or decisions we make to not cut are going to be influenced by a variety of factors, including our most vulnerable community members. This is a listing of, again, not recommendations we're making at this time, just to give a flavor of the types of service reductions we're going to have to think about. These are impacts that have previously been considered and enacted upon, or considered and not acted upon, or may be considered in the future, and sort of just runs the gamut from back of house staffing to appointee staffing to police and fire services to parks and libraries and a whole range of different options. So just want to give a flavor of what we're going to have to be going through and digging in with the departments over these next few weeks and months. I want to highlight the approach that we used last year that we thought was a very strategic and equity-focused approach, and will probably help inform council's discussion over this budget season. As I talked about earlier, we're going to try to find efficiencies, cost savings through reduction in consulting services, supplies, materials, other contractual services to have minimal service impacts. We had that last year, and I expect we'll have another sort of suite of those this year. We also will try to minimize the impact on communities to look at, are there ways we can trim back in our strategic support? But we're kind of reaching our limit here in some respects. We cut back strategic support too much, and then we can't really support the basic operations for a community-facing department. So we're going to think about it, but we got to be careful about how much we cut there. Public safety services, as you saw on that slide before, so much of the general fund is police and fire. So if we can't generate meaningful savings from police and fire without significantly impacting public safety, then the burden on the rest of the organization would be enormous. And so we're going to have to try to find a cost reductions on the public safety side, probably a consideration of, again, of deferring some opening of new facilities may be part of that conversation. And then when we get to community services, we want to the maximum extent possible preserve our core basic services that we know are vital to low-income communities, community of color, immigrants, and other historically marginalized residents. The basics and the day-to-day of what we do, so much of that is aimed at those communities, and so we have to think really, really critically about how we approach reductions to those and preserve those to the extent possible. And we'll also think about a couple of reductions that may take place over a 2-year period. We did that last year pretty successfully. There may be opportunities here where, hey, maybe we can't get at all that reduction the first year, but maybe by year 2 we can. Give us some runway to make sure that we do those reductions in a responsible way. So those are some considerations we took last year. We may want to be thinking about those again for this year. And as Lee mentioned, we also are going to think about preserving and creating capacity for our critical priorities. We have our focus areas. We know the importance of that and the importance of those to our community. There's other select areas of important core service work and community service and strategic support and our deferred infrastructure needs. And so, we have to think about those for some potential targeted adds in areas where funding is preserved. We want to apply our recent lessons to service optimization. Let's experiment. Let's get better. Let's improve the service delivery. But want to note again, any ongoing funding we add here, that is ongoing funding taken from somewhere else in the organization. So we just got to be really judicious about what we're going to make improved investments in. And we do have a budget stabilization reserve, which is good news. The bad news is it is pretty limited, and we've had to access it a pretty decent amount over the last 18 months. So we've had to use about $50 million of our budget stabilization reserve for various needs to make sure that we end the year in a positive balance or meeting our fund balance targets. And so it's been a really important piece for us, and it's there to provide a buffer against the unexpected, but we can't rely on that overly to resolve an ongoing shortfall. And so it's there for strategic one-time uses. I do expect, we'll probably need to use that again in 25-26 for a lack of ongoing ending fund balance, which we always assume is part of any forecast. There'll probably be some that we need some for some one-time critical needs in 26-27, and we need a buffer in case 26-27 gets worse than whatever we forecasted. We've been fortunate to have that little bit of budget stabilization reserve, but it's well below the council policy. Our council policy for general purpose reserves has a target of 10%, and I know we're south of 6%, and we're probably going to be even lower than that. So something we want to keep in mind. We will have some one-time funding that will come online for this budget process, so that is also good news, but we have a lot of pretty significant one-time needs. We are going to need to get started on a City Hall Foundation improvement project related to water intrusion. That's roughly a $45 million project. That's not going to be able to wait much longer. I'm mentioning again here the ERAF that is at risk potentially on a looking back basis, $35 million potentially. Again, might need about $20 million to meet our ending fund balance target by the end of the fiscal year. Not to mention any other deferred maintenance investments we need, some technology investments that are going to be critical as part of any budget process, and any other one-time service delivery needs. So sort of a lot of things that we're going to need to be considered as we look at what kind of one-time funding we have and what we should be putting on the table and what we need to reserve in the budget stabilization reserve for future years. And as I'm almost done talking, we just have here our next steps in the budget process. And so we are going to release our formal 5-year forecast on March 2nd. And so that will, again, we'll relook at everything, all the revenue, all of our cost data, and we'll have a lot of detailed information behind it, as opposed to just a range that you're looking at today. So please keep an eye out for that. And then shortly after that, the mayor will release his March budget message that will be deliberated on by council on March 17th. And then we start cranking on our proposed budget documents, which we'll release at the end of April through early May. We got our study sessions, our public hearings, our community budget meetings, with ultimate goal of having approval of the June budget message on June 16th and all the proposed budget documents. So that is our conversation to you, and now I think it's back to you all for conversation amongst yourselves with some questions here for potential consideration.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate you and Lee setting all of that context. Thanks to the budget office for helping to prepare the content and all the work you do year-round to make sure we have all the best information we need. We're going to turn now to colleagues. I will just note we had memos with reflections from council members Ortiz and Campos. I appreciate those and have read them. And we'll look to analyze what I can incorporate into my message and/or we'll discuss when the March message comes forward and/or today. Really want to take this as an opportunity to hear from colleagues your reflections on the discussion questions that we shared, which you see up on the screen. I think the biggest question in front of us this year is which services to protect, which community goals to prioritize, and ultimately what trade-offs we're willing to make. And of course, we want to do everything we can to find efficiencies and innovation and partner with the county and others to minimize the impacts of reductions. But this is a significant enough shortfall that we will have to make some tough trade-offs. And the sooner we can find alignment around where we think those opportunities are and where there's the most alignment, the better. So the questions are here. They were circulated to the council quite a few days ago, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to reflect on them. I'm going to open it up to colleagues. I will be mostly listening and taking notes. Let me shift over here. All right, so hope to hear from everyone, and my team is here as well, a number of members of our team, including Stephen Keynes, who's the budget director in the mayor's office. So we'll start with Vice Mayor Foley.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jim and Lee, for your presentations, and to Jennifer and Mayor for setting the stage. As I reach the end of my council term, I realize that this is the last budget cycle that I will have the opportunity to influence. But while I'd like to end my term with expanding programs and perhaps implementing new programs, none of that will be possible this fiscal year. This is going to be a tough year where really difficult decisions are made over priorities resulting from a projected shortfall of $65 million. As if that deficit isn't enough, the challenges we face are made more difficult by back-to-back shortfalls in the past few years. This is definitely the most difficult budget year I've seen in my over 7 years on the City Council, and the largest shortfall. But I am no stranger to tough budgets. I was on the school board for San Jose Unified during the 2008 recession, when our country faced the largest financial crisis we had experienced since the Great Depression. As a school board member, and I know Councilmember Cohen was there as well, as a school board member, we faced massive shortfalls and had to make tough decisions on school closures and service reductions. We made it through by focusing on our core business, which was to provide a high-quality, free, and public education to our children. We owed this to our children, our parents, and our staffs. We made it through by staying true to our core services, and I'm confident that we as a city will make it through the other end through this shortfall by focusing on the same things. As we go through this process, I ask myself these questions. What is our core service? What do our residents expect us to provide? What are the services we must provide? And what are the services that are nice to offer, but may be at risk to defund with a deficit? How will these decisions affect our 7,000 employees? As with my school board decisions, working to avoid layoffs is an important consideration. We've been entrusted by our constituents to guide the city through these difficult decisions, and so we shouldn't shy away from this responsibility. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where the question is what programs or services we can or should we reduce, and not how we can expand. I know that there may be some inclinations to add new small programs or projects. Given how tight the budget is, it will be very important for council members to identify offsets for any new programs being proposed. Essential service funds are an excellent source of funds for projects important to council members. For example, every year I use essential services to fund traffic safety projects in my district. I'd like to thank the mayor for providing a list of questions to help guide our discussion and best inform the administration and the mayor's office when crafting the budget for the upcoming year. I'd like to offer some thoughts based on the questions provided. Priority setting has changed nearly every year since I began on council in 2019. Today we have focus areas. Regarding the focus areas, I think we are starting to see some strong progress with this framework, and we should maintain our focus so we don't lose this progress. We shouldn't modify the focus areas, but instead explore opportunities to make that work more efficient. In addition to our focus areas, I think we should preserve library hours, particularly Sunday hours, crossing guards, and Vision Zero resources. We are seeing success with Vision Zero and quick builds, so let's continue to look for other resources to fund these projects, such as grant funds from MTC or VTA. We should also explore alternative funding solutions for the automated speed camera program created by AB 645, as it seems federal grant funds that we had previously counted on are unlikely to come through, but this is an important program for us to implement. When considering reductions, the administration should explore services or programs that are outside of our core service areas and focus areas. Services or programs that are duplicative should also be considered for reduction. For example, if a service is provided by the city, as well as a nonprofit or another public agency, we should consider reducing or eliminating that service. To minimize the impacts of any service reductions, we should also focus on reductions to services that are funded one time or serve a relatively small number of residents. Further, this is an opportunity for each department to review their procedures and work to create more efficiencies, thereby saving time and becoming more effective. If a policy needs to be changed to reduce redundancies or inefficiencies, then we, the City Council, should help make that happen. I'd just like to close by thanking the administration, particularly Jim Shannon, who I have tremendous confidence in, and the entire Budget Office for all of their work thus far to deliver the critical information this council needs to make budget decisions. I'm confident that this council will be able to deliver a balanced, fiscally sound budget that minimizes impacts to the critical services that our residents rely upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I really appreciate all of that concrete and actionable feedback, and I know we'll benefit through this difficult budget cycle from all of your experience, both in the school board and here at City Council, helping us make good decisions. So appreciate those reflections. Let's turn to Councilmember Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for our city administration for walking us through this difficult fiscal reality and the trade-offs ahead of us. I understand the position our city is in, and we'll be leaning into this discussion in collaboration with both the residents of our city administration, and of course our municipal bargaining units. I will not make these decisions lightly and understand that trade-offs in our budget will ultimately have an effect on all of our residents. I'd like to begin my comments by discussing the memo I submitted outlining the East San Jose Economic Revitalization Framework. Quick note, I know that I placed a projected cost of a consultant for that framework to be over $100,000. However, I wanted to make sure my colleagues saw that I've also secured a soft commitment from local philanthropic partners to fund half of the funding needed to develop that framework. And I'm continuing to meet with other partners to secure further funding commitments. But I would hope that the city can put some money into this process to hopefully have some skin in the game. At its core, this framework is about taking a place-based approach to economic development, one that recognizes that communities that have experienced long-term disinvestment require intentional, coordinated strategies to truly thrive. This framework is not abstract. It is intended as a concrete, community-driven plan to reverse generations of disinvestment and finally deliver real economic opportunity for East San Jose. While finalizing the budget is a long way off, I wanted to use the priority setting to at least share this proposal with my colleagues so that they can understand what I hope to fund in this budget. As it relates to the priorities of East San Jose residents, they are clear. Safer neighborhoods, stronger small businesses in the local economy, support for our youth, accountability for blighted property owners, and real affordability for our working families. First, public safety, particularly as it relates to our small business corridors. In East San Jose, our small businesses are often family-run, immigrant-owned, and deeply tied to their neighborhood's stability and vitality. When safety concerns go unaddressed, it directly affects whether businesses can keep their doors open, provide well-paying jobs, and serve as community anchors. Protecting these corridors requires maintaining investments and avoiding cuts to programs and staff that prevent harm before it happens, including those that support first responders, our Project Hope program, and crime intervention services. Second, youth intervention and, of course, crime prevention. Everyone on this dais knows how personal this topic is to me. I grew up in a gang-impacted community and saw too many of my friends fall through these cracks. Programs similar to New Hope for Youth and the City Peace Project changed the trajectory of my life. And if we are serious about long-term safety and economic stability, we must invest early and consistently in our young people and their families. The Eastside Union High School District is going to be forced to roll back its funding for these programs at high schools across our districts. We can expect to see the consequences of this decision play out in our streets and our neighborhoods. These programs save lives every day, and unfortunately, you don't see that in our newspapers. Gang activity will only get worse if we shutter similar programs funded by SJYA and BEST. I also want to mention that this work goes hand in hand with the initiatives within the Children and Youth Master Plan, and of course the work led by Grail Family Services. These organizations provide culturally competent services, family stabilization, and youth support that city programs alone cannot replicate. Cutting or destabilizing these partners would weaken the very safety net our neighborhoods rely on. Third, accountability for neglected property owners through a coordinated response with PBCE and our city attorney's office. And I know that we currently do this, but I don't think we're doing it to the best of our ability. And I think that if we move our focus away from this effort, we won't see any progress on this front. It only takes one chronically neglected property to undo years of neighborhood progress through Beautify SJ. If we want to effectively address blight and irresponsible property ownership, we must ensure the city attorney's office has the capacity to enforce our codes, and when necessary, pursue litigation against bad actors who harm surrounding residents and businesses. We cannot simply be held responsible to clean up everyone's mess without holding those accountable who treat our neighborhoods like a garbage dump. And of course, affordability. Families across San Jose are being squeezed out by rising housing costs, utilities, and everyday expenses. When the people who work in our neighborhoods can no longer afford to live in them, displacement becomes inevitable. Our budget must remain funding and prioritizing stabilizing costs for our residents, expanding affordability, identifying a new funding stream for affordable housing production, protecting rent relief, and ensuring that working families can continue to call this city home. I look forward to continuing this conversation. I do plan on holding town halls in my district, as well as partnering with bargaining units to have these conversations about, potentially trade-offs and cuts. At this moment, I'm not proposing any yet, but I will be future on in this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Appreciate all that feedback, and on your first point, your memo, which really helped lay out the rationale, and appreciate that you're out there finding matching resources, and as a one-time expense, it's a lot easier to find a way to get something like that done. So it's good to have that context now. Really appreciate that. Let me turn to Councilmember Condelis.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jim and Lee, for the presentation, and the rest of the staff for the realities of our upcoming budget and the difficult years ahead of us. I do want to say that I do feel confident, especially with City Manager McGuire at the helm, who's been through difficult budget years. And there's a slide in the PowerPoint that showed some really, really deep cuts, and you were here. So I do feel confident in our ability to get through this as painless as possible. But the reality is we are facing a shortfall, and that means hard choices, and we have to be very clear about our values, and especially as how we consider the well-being of our residents. I think when resources are constrained, the question isn't just about what we could afford, but it's what we can't afford to lose. There are types of programs that I consider essential. Youth programming must remain a priority. These programs in my opinion, aren't extras. They're preventative. They're public safety investments that keep our young people engaged, safe, and connected. Funding youth programming reduces long-term costs related to public safety. Keeps young people on the right track, and whether that's scholarships or after-school programming, they're essential. Second, I think the place that we often cut from is placemaking. That includes Viva Parks, and something that I also think is essential to creating stronger neighborhoods and bringing the community outdoors in together. By activating public spaces, we create safe places, welcoming places for our residents, especially given what we're seeing at the federal level. That's not happening as much as we want to or we're used to. Third, again, I agree, Vice Mayor, on the library hours. I think those are essential and something that I've heard from my residents that they have seen a direct benefit from. It's not just about inconveniencing people. It cuts off access to education and the opportunity for workforce development and basic services for folks who need them the most. And lastly, something that is often overlooked, but it's senior services, especially nutrition programs, where we parlay federal dollars with local dollars and maximize the experience for folks who we don't often hear from, is the seniors in our community, because these programs are lifelines. Addressing food insecurity, reducing isolation, and supporting health is something I've heard and something that I think we should be mindful of. Moving through this budget process, I obviously want us to be disciplined, thoughtful, and creative, but I want us to be clear. Investing in our youth, seniors, libraries, and families should not be quote-unquote discretionary spending. These are foundational, and I think that's what we should be doing well as a city. One area that was asked in those presentations, Mayor, is where can we find efficiencies? I think the Beautify program is something where we've made it clear that it's important for us as city leaders to see a clean city, and I don't disagree, but I think we can definitely lean in, because we've heard in NSC that we are investing, but we are not seeing that drop in folks illegally dumping. We are not seeing that, and so I think we can be more upstream of the issue, educating folks to see if we can curb the increase, because we can do 12 dumpster days, a dumpster day every month, and folks will still be lined down the block trying to get rid of their possessions. But I think that program should be looked at and identified for efficiencies, and it's an opportunity for us. The next area that I think we can look at, it's not easy, but it's also our response to encampment management and coordinated care integration with the county, to see how we can find efficiencies in that program, and see how we can get some accelerated investments from our partners in the county, which would mean difficult conversations, but I think conversations that all of us have been meaning to have with our colleagues in the county. I have a few other points, but I just want to close with this. Looking at our focus areas, we have 5, but I think there is one that's sorely needed, and that is the impact to our families, specifically areas that I've talked about with regards to youth and seniors and our most vulnerable. These populations cut across everything we work on, from public safety, economic opportunity, and affordability, which surveys have showed us over the last 2 years are especially top of mind. And so I think making a dedicated focus area that ensures that our budget decisions are intentionally evaluated through the lens of those who are impacted and most reliant on city services should be key. Under this focus area, obviously the master plan, the Children and Youth Services Master Plan should be something we look at, and something we have supported and affirmed on this council in principle, but I think we have to match it with a focus. And I think it's a challenge, and I'm not saying it needs a massive overhaul, but it's something that if we are serious and intentional about protecting our most vulnerable in our city, this is something that we have to identify and not have it as an afterthought. Yeah, I look forward to hearing from the rest of my colleagues, and look forward to engaging in the difficult decisions ahead. And actually, before I forego the rest of my time, you know, something you said, Mayor, is our focus on external dollars and the dollars we get from folks in the federal government and regional funding opportunities. While they are limited, they are still out there. And so, you know, I'm hesitant to rely on the federal government with any source of funding nowadays. But with regards to our regional opportunities, whether it's VTA, BAFA, or any other opportunity to go get funding, I think we should also be leaning in heavily on that, especially to move pilot projects or things that we can find opportunities for in our budget. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Appreciate that, and I especially appreciate you highlighting a couple of areas where we might be able to find efficiency or reduce services. Unfortunately, while we're all loath to even suggest what we might look at, that's exactly what we're going to have to do and ultimately approve collectively here. So it's helpful to have a sense of that, and just, you know, reminding everyone as we go on those discussion questions, which include, you know, where should we consider reductions? Where should we consider structural changes or service model shifts? How should the administration, how should Jennifer and her team think about budget balancing proposals? And how should we think about services that are uniquely provided by the city, such as a 911 response, versus those where there are public, nonprofit, and other entities? So I appreciate that you highlighting a few examples and just highlighting that for all of our colleagues as we go on. That's going to be at the heart of our difficult work this year. Councilor Kamei, we'll go to you next.
Thank you. I also would like to thank Lee Wilcox and Jim Shannon for all their work. And I really want to thank the team, because I know that it takes many, many, many people as we come forward with such a challenging year. And although we do see it as a challenging year, we have a lot of faith in our city manager to be able to, go through this. We've had hard times before, but with hard times comes hard decisions. And that's something that I think the last 2 years have been, avoided in terms of really going deep and cutting deep. I think that at the end of the day, we will balance it all out and try to make things workable for everyone, involved, including the staff as well as the community, because we are facing big challenges. I want to say that I really think that over the last 3 years, this is my 4th budget, we've been going incrementally in the right direction. Certainly, we've learned a lot over the last few years, and when I first came on board here, the one thing that I asked is, what would you do differently next year, right? And so I think that every year we've gotten better, and I'm very, very proud of that. Even though it's going to be a challenge this year, I think that we will get to a good place as we continue to look at our focus areas. I do think the focus areas are the right ones. Yes, we could probably find ways of being able to be inclusive of how do you put youth and seniors in there. I see it as part of increasing community safety and really thinking about that. But I think that that's certainly something that is on my mind. I do want to say that community and public safety seems to be the #1 thing in my district, and certainly one of the things that I would like to have us consider is, as we're thinking about cuts, we also have to think about more revenue generation, and ask why in some areas things are down. The usual suspects is, well, the economy, the workforce is decreasing, people are not coming back to work, or what have you. There are many excuses. The one thing that I will say that we have not really, at least I don't recall talking about, is who is rating our funds, right? So our partners at the state have no problem looking at the local level. I mean, Jim mentioned the ERAF, but there have at least it sort of was brought to my attention, legislation that changes the way in which sales tax from a retail store versus a dealership has changed. And, you know, the numbers are quite significant, right? So I think that as the legislation changes, we need to be much more sort of like aware of who's going to raid our pocket, right? Because these are sales dollars that we have seen over a period of time, and all of a sudden, guess what? They're going to go directly to CF, the state entity for sales taxes. So I think that being mindful and trying to get ahead of that is going to be important in many ways, because we're not the only ones who are going to have a shortfall. Everybody is going to have a shortfall. Therefore, it's not just the ERAF, it's all of these other pockets. And guess what? I learned the other day that there's going to be a mosquito vector control benefit assessment on the line, right? Open Space wants to put something on the ballot. Everybody's going to start putting stuff on the ballot because they're trying to close the gap of where their revenue and expenses are. So I think that as we start thinking about this year's budget, maybe in the next 2-3 years, we have to start thinking about number one, you know, are there ways that we will increase revenue, right? And I know that Jim mentioned that it wasn't until 31 that our one tax is going to go down. I don't know that, you know, I mean, I don't know what can be done, but I think that just be wary that there may be other entities who'll get in line first. And so I just feel that we need to be mindful of how other budgets affect our budget and who's looking after taking some of our money in other ways, right? Because, you know, car sales, I know last year was down, but, you know, was it because this new change in the law allowed money that used to come to us is going somewhere else, right? So I think that we need to be a little bit more aware of some of those things and, you know, work with IGR to be able to get ahead of this legislation. And I also think that we have to kind of continue to hold on to what we have because, you know, I think that it's going to be easy as we start thinking about other measures that are not just local, but throughout the Bay Area, have impacts or not on our budgets. I also think that there are areas that we talk about constantly. I know in my district, code enforcement and parking enforcement is a constant thing. I get information from my residents about that all the time. But I think that we need to think about how it is that we have our workload and how do we do our work. And what does it take to do our work? Because we can't have just one attorney in the attorney's office doing code enforcement. Just one. How is that? And yet there's so much we have to do. And I'm really delighted to see the city manager's service and service optimization. I'd like to add, you know, in terms of another item to think about, as you're looking at processes for, let's say, food vendors out there, the police department cannot give you a citation. I mean, they cannot give you a ticket. They give you a citation. That citation goes to code enforcement. Code enforcement has to go through finance. So there's a lot of little channels that you have to go through. Is it necessary? What are the risks of having it go directly or having the department do it? When we talk about efficiencies and streamlining, are we thinking about how many times someone has to touch something, right? And how long they need to respond, right? Because if I'm waiting for something and, you know, it's like, oh, it's due in 5 days and I haven't gotten a response, I'm calling, I'm emailing, I'm texting, I'm doing whatever I can. My staff is doing the same thing. Or if you have to go back and forth, I don't know. I think that if anyone gets something, they must respond, at least in my office, respond within 24 to 48 hours, right? And somehow these processes need to find a way to be simpler. Why does it have to go through all the departments, these departments? So I think that we need to think about how we do our work to see, because time is what we're losing. And that is a form of, trying to figure out, well, what do you cut? Well, you cut the time, and hopefully you get to a better place. So I just put that out there as what I am experiencing, and this is just one office, right? So we have to put that in the mix too, and maybe we need a prize for whoever comes up with the best processes. But I think that it's certainly something that will do us really well if we minimize the time. So there's a lot more, I think, that we will continue to discuss. I want to thank you for the discussion questions, and I'm sorry that I'm running out of time, but I think that this is the beginning of good discussions.
Thanks so much, Councilor. I appreciate all of your reflections, especially that last point you were making about service optimization, streamlining workflows, better integrating work across different teams and departments. I think there's always room to improve in that area, so it's a good thing to highlight, and appreciate it. Okay, we're going to go on to Councilmember Mulcahy next.
Thank you, Mayor. Jim, I'm looking at you and your team, and the body of work is just incredible, and the available resources to really understand the challenge that we're in, and just so appreciate how much work has gone into this. I also want to acknowledge city manager work on the budget principles revisions, or the suggested revisions there. As I understand it, they haven't been visited in quite some time, and I think it's important. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that in my comments. And as the lone wolf in the budget cycle, I am without a partner in a Brown Act. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse for the rest of you, but I am going to take a few minutes to sort of air out some of the things that I'm thinking, and hopefully to influence how you all think in your Brown Acts of 5. I thought it was very telling that the resident top concerns, the top 5, fit very neatly into our lowest city service ratings. Not verbatim, but certainly resonate between them. And I think that's very informative about sort of the quality of the focus areas that we have chosen before, and assume will be relatively the same moving forward. So, Mayor, I appreciate sort of the one-sided conversations with your team prior to now, but also the fact that your team provided some questions to help shape the feedback today, I think was helpful. So I'm just going to go through those questions and read a little bit verbatim. But all the focus areas remain valid, as I was saying, and in line with what we hear from residents about their needs. So we've sort of done our own polling in District 6, and the top areas of concern direct from residents. Now, when we got into office, we probably inherited about 2,000 emails, as well as, the thousands of emails, texts, voicemails that we've gotten throughout this last year. And it's going to be no surprise, addressing homelessness and its impact on our community is number 1. Traffic safety and parking, especially in density housing areas that are by today's standards underparked and not near transit that works. Cleanliness and maintenance of public spaces. Number 4, general public safety and everyday crimes. Yes, we're the safest big city in America, but people are still dealing with things that are just making them feel unsafe. Affordability, cost of living, which our levers to address are very limited, as we all know. To make changes or cuts, we have to rely on evaluating scope and sequencing to get at what we know is working and prioritize our spending accordingly. This way, we narrow our scope to initiatives that are core to the city's role, have clear, measurable outcomes, and they answer the calls to the public. The city's pretty new at working on framework and then sort of intentional data and goals. we should consider phasing or delaying those that still need evaluation to give time to focus on the area, such as our top 2 to 3 resident concerns in each focus area, as was provided to us. Can we right-size or deploy who is playing a role in these focus areas, such as we might have learned that PRNS is more suited to pick up something that housing or SJPD is doing, and vice versa. We have to get creative and be willing to make shifts based on what we've learned and what we know. Lastly, we as a council need to show great discipline, especially in 26-27, from pushing staff to study or enact new policy or programs so as not to distract from the very focused work ahead in order to make cuts unnoticeable to the public. So question 2, which programs or services are the most essential to preserve? Prioritize services that protect life, health, and safety, and wherever we can, quality of life, such as libraries, parks, public spaces, while also seeing where we can streamline services that prevent higher downstream costs. For example, a big time suck in our office, and I know we're all dealing with this, Rosemary, you talked about this a little bit, is the cost of interjurisdictional communication and coordination on homelessness response, waterways, public and private property cleanup, as just a few of the examples. When we have to reach out to the county or Valley Water or Caltrans, where there is no clear roadmap or codified agreement, we end up going back and forth on who is responsible, pointing back and forth about who and how an agency can or cannot, will or will not respond, wasting time, resources, and at the end of the day, public funds. And I'm certain that those same agencies are dealing with the same thing, probably pointing the finger right back at San Jose, suggesting that we're causing them to waste funds. I think I may have just given Joe Royce an assignment by saying this out loud, but do we have any data tracking how much we're spending or in fact wasting of city dollars for this kind of coordination, and what potential cost savings would be with more MOUs and other less time-consuming agreements with these agencies? I'd also offer that essential services does not mean untouchable, but we should be cautious about cuts that create greater costs later. For example, the 2-week shutdown of homeless response during the furlough at the week's end of last year most likely takes more than the 2 weeks to catch back up for the lost time of enforcement and cleanup and an elevated redundant cost. So question 3, which programs or services should be considered for reduction? Referring to the comments on the first question, we need to review programs that rely heavily on the general fund that have limited measurable outcomes and do a deep dive on duplicative services that are offered elsewhere. Do we have any data on programs that were funded primarily on one-time fund dollars that now require ongoing support and partially funding FTEs? Has the city, and I'm sort of asking these questions out loud, and I know you're taking notes, Jim, but these are questions that I think we need to get at. Has the city conducted any review on programs that have grown incrementally beyond the preliminary base increases year over year without strategic review? And overall, I'd encourage scaling back on programming before eliminating, including reviews on where programs are most impactful with analysis on equity and geographic impacts. Question 4, programs where the City Council is willing to consider structural changes. Now, I appreciate the question as it gets at the core long-term point. Incremental cuts year over year are not sustainable and erode service quality. And as I mentioned before, cities should explore overlapping programs and be aggressive in consolidation. Another huge shift would be to realign our programs with present-day needs. Can we identify programs that can be redesigned either with technology or potentially with partnerships? Jim, you talked about budgeted positions on page 26, and I appreciate you saying that was for historical perspective. But having said that, there's always reference to how many employees we used to have. It has been a go-to crutch, I believe, for San Jose for many years. I wonder if that's the right mindset or relevant to any of our decision making. For example, I understand the headcount issue with SJPD, and certainly more deployed officers can be a deterrent to crime and so many other benefits from more sworn. But with SJPD at 1,400 back in the day, should that be the goal now? Continuing to invest in technology, aircraft, and other advances should inform what the adjusted goal should be to right-size SJPD for today's San Jose. And I use that as an example, and I'd pose the same question to all city departments that previously enjoyed higher headcounts. 5, what criteria should the administration apply when bringing forward budget balancing proposals? Suggested criteria in no particular order: alignment with council focus areas and resident priorities, legal or operational necessity, long-term fiscal sustainability, the ability to scale up or down, availability of alternative funding or providers, measurable outcomes, and the impact on vulnerable populations. So thanks to the Budget Office on your potential cuts. I'm running out of time. I'd list my criteria as this: clear service impacts, the who, where, and how. Short and long-term fiscal effects. Will this reduction be for a single year? Will it have lasting savings? Equity and geographic analysis. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna finish with one other thing, and I know we're not talking about our sort of other partners and the enterprise opportunities like the airport as an example. But I do think that we have a significant opportunity to help be a part of the renaissance of what our new airport should be. Travel has changed, business travel has changed, our airport competition has changed, and the airport has land and strategic opportunities in front of us, and I think as a city, we need to do a better job to support that strategic, creative thinking that the airport should consider, like a hotel on site, like expanded FBO or HBO on the west side of the airport, like the other autonomous flight that is coming faster than any of us want to acknowledge. And so I think we have to do a better job of supporting the airport from the standpoint of how do we help them evolve to what the airport can be and should be moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks again for the hard work on the budget analysis.
Thanks, Councilmember. I really appreciate hearing all of that constructive feedback. I think a lot of it's actionable, and while we focused primarily on the focus areas in the general fund today, we get to comment on, weigh in on, in the March budget message, we'll speak to city enterprises as well. So it's definitely not at all exclusive. I think the commentary on the airport is well taken. And since I won't get to talk to you outside of public meetings on the budget for the next quite a few months, it's helpful to hear all of that detail today. And my team and I will certainly be thinking a little more on that as we craft the message. Let me turn now to Councilmember Campos.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to provide input into the development of your March budget message, and want to thank staff for the presentation. Also, huge thank you, as Councilmember Mulcahy uplifted, to staff's work on the budget principles draft revisions. We are entering a particularly challenging budget cycle, and the commitment that we all share to transparency and public engagement will serve us and the community well. And so I appreciate and support the proposed changes, including the clear process and requirement for budget requests. Understanding these trade-offs and the level of effort that is necessary to implement new programs and policies is what ultimately will help us make the best informed decisions possible. And as we're seeing a constrained budget year after year, I hope that our council can begin to recognize that this status quo is unsustainable, and we do have to make some tough choices over the next several months. So starting with the focus areas, I would like the city to consider youth intervention as an integral and strategic element of the community safety focus area. So +1 to Councilmember Kamei for also referencing this. preserving high-impact youth-serving programs in PRNS and the library will divert young people in our city from counterproductive activities. And furthermore, with continued investment, our city will benefit from providing opportunities for economic mobility through educational and recreational programs. Similarly, I recommended narrowing our reducing the neighborhood cleanup focus area. Continued substantial investment is proving unsustainable, and the gains are temporary. So at this point, the trade-offs are untenable. Cutting library hours or eroding core services like public safety and laying off essential staff are unacceptable to our community, and we must rethink our approach to the neighborhood cleanup focus area. I would strongly encourage us to consider bringing this focus area under the community safety umbrella, as I've seen in my district and heard from my residents, making sure that our youth have safe routes to school that are clean, that are accessible, is part of the reason why this is such a key area for our community. And so thinking strategically about how we can do more with less is the theme of our upcoming budget conversations. Finally, I strongly encourage the city to explore refining the reducing unsheltered homelessness focus area. Again, continued substantial and increasing investment in the EIH system is proving to be unsustainable. Like neighborhood cleanup, there are gains which are limited and temporary. The city has spent tens of millions of dollars to provide interim shelter for around 3,000 or 4,000 people. And there is a bottleneck in the continuum of care because those who are placed into emergency interim housing struggle to exit homelessness when there is no place to go that provides stable, affordable housing. And at the same time, we see far too many households that are falling into homelessness for the first time because of the evisceration of the social safety net at the federal level. And so looking at reducing unsheltered homelessness is an area that needs to be refined and should include a much more aggressive and focused attention on preventing families from becoming homeless in the first place. And we should keep in mind that in the most recent community survey that we reviewed just last week, only 10% of our residents rated the city's efforts to address homelessness as excellent or good, meaning and we know that 65% rated the city's efforts as poor or very poor. And while addressing homelessness remains the #1 in our community's top issues, with minimal progress, we are provided an opportunity to rethink this focus area that matters so much to our community and how we can more effectively address the crisis and avoid breaking our city budget. Regarding services that are most essential to preserve, I want to emphasize high-impact youth-serving programs. These include the No Wrong Door strategy, which is essential in implementing the Children and Youth Services Master Plan, the Safe Summer Initiative Grant, Rock After School, and the Bringing Everyone's Strengths Together, or BEST, program funding, among a few. In the library, we should preserve educational and workforce programs which improve the quality of life for learners of all ages and across communities. These include digital empowerment, college and career, and early education and reading. And I'm grateful to our dedicated PRNS and library staff who provide these crucial programs that mean a lot for our families. And I look forward to working with City Administration and City Council to preserve these and other high-impact programs. Just yesterday, I was meeting with 4 principals in Oak Grove School District, and I asked them what city services matter most to our school communities, and they talked about the Youth Empowerment Alliance, Walk and Roll, Safe Routes to Schools, our libraries, and access to public spaces as the key components that are bringing success to our students, our schools, and our community. And so thank you to Councilmember Candelas, who also spoke to these key services. I am grateful to hearing from my colleagues about how we can work to protect the services that we are hearing from our families, our constituents, and our residents. And on that same vein, we are seeing that the cost of living is a growing concern for families, now seen in the top 10 issues of importance. And we've also seen housing affordability consistently ranking in the top 2. And so as families are struggling to pay bills, investment in reducing the cost of living will generate a ripple effect in our local economy. These are real investments. When we increase access and affordability to childcare, it provides more parents with the opportunity to participate in the workforce and empower local consumer spending, which we know will in turn support our general fund. Regarding programs and services that should be considered for reduction, I strongly encourage reviewing the allocations to encampment management, neighborhood blight reduction, and beautification. Certainly, these are important programs. However, we must be prudent in how we approach investment in temporary efforts. And for similar reasons, I will encourage looking at the cost effectiveness of programs like Olive, Homeward Bound, and outreach and sanitation services. Now, regarding program areas where I recommend structural changes and service model shifts, I want to highlight the ongoing general fund contribution to support EIH. Tentatively, it's forecasted at $17 million in this upcoming fiscal year and increases to $30 million, then $48, and then $58 million in the following years. This is why I am emphasizing that it is an unsustainable allotment of general fund dollars, and we have to really have a hard conversation about whether the community is really asking us to spend hundreds of million dollars in aggregate to support EIH operations that temporarily houses around 3,000 people. It's a service model shift is necessary for the fiscal sustainability of our city. And finally, regarding how the city should weigh services that produce substantial improvements for small populations, we just heard the challenge related to reducing unsheltered homelessness. I will add that children, families, and seniors in the city need more support. With around 150,000 young people under the age of 14 and nearly 100,000 over the age of 75, we have to invest thoughtfully in the communities that are less or unable to advocate for themselves. So I hope that you will consider the vulnerable residents, particularly those that are at risk of falling into homelessness, as we work together in preparing a balanced budget for the next fiscal year. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councilmember. I appreciate all the specificity and examples and clarity on where your priorities are. So I've taken a lot of notes, and we'll certainly be reflecting on that as we write our budget message. I will just note for everyone's context on the EIH system specifically that we have had over 5 years of consistent council direction to build out and operate that system. And I do think we have work to do to find efficiencies, make sure we're integrating the system with the county to get better throughput and services for our most vulnerable neighbors. Of course, we're all advocating through IGR and other avenues to ensure that the state shows up. But I do know that over those many years of consistent council direction, we also were very aware of the projected costs and that Measure E would be able to cover them. So anyway, it's a conversation obviously for us all to have and can continue to evolve, but I just want to provide that extra context. Let's turn to Councilmember Tordillos.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all of the city staff who've already put in so much work preparing for this budget season, and I know that there's a lot of hard work ahead as we balance some really difficult decisions, so thank you. I also appreciate all of the thoughtful comments from all of my colleagues, and particularly just wanted to highlight Councilmember Kamei's thoughts on improving the efficiency of our city bureaucracy. In my previous career, I liked the idea of having a prize aimed at improving some of our processes. We had an ongoing program called Bureaucracy Busters that was specifically focused on identifying process improvements to increase efficiency. And I like these sorts of investments because they allow our limited staff to do more with less, while hopefully minimizing, as was said earlier, actual visible impacts to city services to our residents. So to that end, I would encourage staff to continue to look at areas where we can hopefully streamline areas where the city is putting more work on its own plate through the processes that we impose. I think in particular, I'd like to call out the opportunity to continue to expand the ministerial approval permitting process. These programs we know decrease time and costs for our project applicants while also decreasing workloads for city staff. And if implemented effectively, I think that they have the potential to foster additional investment in our city, hopefully allowing us to make more progress on addressing our housing shortage, supporting job creation, and at the same time creating new durable revenue streams to support the city in the years ahead. Similarly, I think that we should explore opportunities to streamline and accelerate the code enforcement process. We have been navigating a tricky code enforcement case here in District 3, so recently I had the opportunity to sit down with Director Burton and kind of go through the full process, every single step in the process, between when a code case is identified and when it hopefully gets resolved or there's enforcement action. And it is a very complicated process, so to the extent that there is room for the city to streamline some of that process, get us from identifying a valid code enforcement case through hopefully enforcement and compliance more quickly. We know that we have a large backlog of code cases. Hopefully some of this streamlining can allow us to move through that backlog more quickly and again allow our staff to do more with less while providing improved service levels. And then finally, we just encourage the administration to consider additional areas where technology may be able to help augment our limited staff resources. We've seen in recent years how investments in technology have had really positive outcomes in public safety, and I think that there's a whole host of other city services that could benefit from similar investments in technology, from parking enforcement to traffic safety, code enforcement cases, and other city services that, again, will allow us to do more with less during lean times, while hopefully even providing, in some cases, improved services to all of our residents. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Appreciate those reflections. Councilmember Dwan.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to say thank you to our staff within the cities and my colleagues for their thoughtful input. Today's budget is about investing in people and continue to build a city that is safe, clean, livable, and affordable, where everyone can truly be proud of and thrives. Our priority should be towards our children and youth services, including New Hope and city projects serving youth by reaching out to young individuals facing adversity and those at risk, along with their family and their communities. Our youth is our future. We need to continue to invest in them. A lot of these programs have prevention, mentorship, safe place that for our children to go, job training, job placement. It creates an impact upon our youth from early on and a long-lasting impact to our community. Two, I would like to say that our library is an essential community hub, a place where learning, workforce development, digital access, and a connection for all ages. And we should not cut, especially the library services. Three, this budget should also address housing with a focus on protecting our older adults and creating pathway for younger generation to stay in our community where they can call home. A stable, affordable housing is critical to preventing displacement and gentrification. We also should reaffirm our commitment to our immigrant communities, ensuring access to services, resources, and opportunity that allow families to be fully protected and participate in our city's success and to thrive. Finally, through pre-engineering modular shelter, we are working to reduce the cost and improve services for our unsheltered residents, focusing on optimizing of services by speed up the transfer from EIH and permanent and PASH via amplified services, including in there is job training, job placement, mentorship, that show the dignity, the efficiency, and the pathway for unsheltered residents to permanent housing. We also need to make sure that other level of government to fulfill their obligation by reimburse the city of San Jose for our work toward unsheltered residents. These savings can reduce our budget deficit, keep our community safe, clean, and livable. This budget should also reflect our value, equity, safety, and opportunity for us all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Council Member. Let me go back. Have any colleagues who haven't spoken yet wanted to weigh in? I'm not seeing any takers. We'll go back to Councilmember Campos.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank my colleagues who spoke on the importance of effectuating the Children Youth Master Plan. Also, Mayor, you mentioned the memo that I introduced for this study session, and just want to underscore how critical it is to ensure that as a council, we are really looking at every constituent, every age group that we are beholden to. And so this is a key opportunity for us to make meaningful progress in the lives of our children, youth, and their families. I'd also like to acknowledge the community members and chambers with us today. I read the public comments submitted on today's study session and read what I interpreted as a desire to see more investments in protecting our immigrant community and working to achieve our climate goals. And so, Mayor, you began this conversation encouraging us to align city priorities with the needs of the community, emphasizing long-term stability and growth for our city. And I just want to end my reflections with our council taking this opportunity to think differently about how we've been operating a budget that meets the needs of our community. Do we want to continue managing a budget that is making slow and expensive progress, or can we reimagine a budget that truly reflects the rising cost of living, an affordability crisis that is moving more families into homelessness, and the investments that our communities, particularly our immigrants, our youth and older adult communities, are asking for to ensure that San Jose is the best place to live, work, start a family, and retire in for everybody? Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Appreciate your additional reflections. Let me turn to Councilor Kameh.
Thank you. I wanted to say something in terms of some of us who had been on school board and experienced the terrible cuts that we had to make know that the first thing that gets cut are some of the most valuable things, such as art, music, sports, and those are items of quality of life. And I think that this week, we've been experiencing some really great vibrancy. I was here to see the beautiful umbrellas, and those art forms really bring something different to us and our community. So I just wanted to say something as we think about what's on the chopping block, really think about quality of life too, because activating public spaces, art, libraries, sports, and music really make a difference in our lives, and considering all the challenges that we have. And I want to try to think about not just, I like Jim's approach in terms of things that you could do over a 2-year kind of framework, in the budget, what can you do this year, what can you do next year, so that you have some time to like smooth it out a little bit, as opposed to saying, oh, no, it's got to be cut right here. And so as we move forward, if there's a way to transition some things, I think that would be much more helpful. I actually am more optimistic for the future, considering what's happening this week, as well as what's happening over the next few months, and next year with our ability to celebrate our 250th anniversary of the city. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and they mentioned that the Olympics are coming, the soccer Olympics are coming, and so in 27. And so, I think that there's some momentum going in the right direction. So while there's some doom and gloom in terms of where we are, I really think that the mayor and the council really have pushed through to try to create revenue streams on the other side that really, hopefully, will offset some of these other challenges. So I want us to think about quality of life as we're approaching the budget this year.
Thanks, Councilmember. I appreciate that optimism as we start to bring at least our council discussion to a close. And I agree. I think it'll take a few years to play out, but I do think there are areas where we've positioned ourselves for economic growth and a more organic growth of the tax base. I do think sports, entertainment, arts, culture, this experience economy that is emerging out of the pandemic, particularly in and around downtown, but not exclusively there, is a real bright spot, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. And I think we have something to say about how that evolves in our city. I also think the work that ESD and others have done to make us the most power-ready city in the state, and our ability to bring online manufacturing, data centers, labs, and actually have power ready to go at a scale that no other city does, at least for this narrow window of the next 4 to 5 years. We have a really unique competitive advantage for a brief period of time. And as we've talked about, each data center means another $3 to $6 million of net general fund revenue. So that's a really significant fiscal impact and means less difficult trade-offs. And I think there are many others. I wanted to highlight one other just optimistic point as we close, which is I was looking back at the annual report on city services that our city auditor, Joe Royce, presented a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's really noteworthy that after a period of time, I think largely corresponding with the pandemic and all of the challenges there, we had sort of been stuck in a rut in terms of resident satisfaction, trust in local government, and a feeling that we weren't being strategic enough in driving better outcomes. And one of the things many of us together, did on the council at the time was institute these focus areas and rethink how we approach our biggest challenges. And as we saw in Lee's presentation today, by focusing on our community's biggest priorities, setting goals, measuring, and increasing the level of accountability, and therefore our ability to iterate and be innovative in the 5 focus areas, we have significantly, measurably reduced or improved metrics. Public safety, crime down over 20% in 3 years, unsheltered homelessness down about a third, and it corresponds with an increase in trust in City Hall that we haven't seen in years. In the last 3 years, trust in City Hall has gone up over 37% after slow declines for many years. And I really think it's a testament to this council's work focusing, being more accountable for outcomes, being more pragmatic, prioritizing solutions that move the needle in a year or two, not a hope that maybe they'll change something in 10 or 20 years. And so I think we've done, it hasn't been easy, but forcing ourselves to not try to be everything to everyone, and really get down to the brass tacks of reducing crime, getting people housed, cleaning up the city, reducing friction in investing in housing, creating an environment where people can invest in jobs and grow the tax base, is working, and we see that. We have not seen an increase in trust in City Hall of 37% anytime I can see in the historic data here. And so I want to end on that optimistic note, because while our costs have gone up faster than revenues, which are unfortunately slowing right now, we're definitely on to something, and people are noticing and giving us better and better feedback as we go, which is really heartening. So with that, I appreciate everybody, all the colleagues who gave feedback, really appreciate it. Especially appreciate those of you who were brave enough to suggest areas where we might consider finding efficiencies, streamlining, or reducing services, because that's going to be a lot of our discussion, unfortunately, over the coming months. But I know that we'll get through that together with the support of our professional staff. And we do have some time for public comment, and I know we have some folks here who want to share their thoughts with the council. Tony, how many cards do you have?
8.
8, perfect. So we can do the full 2 minutes for our public commenters.
Okay, I'm going to call your name. When you hear your name, come on down to the podium. You can go ahead and start speaking. The timer is up above you. Jose Murillo, Jeremy Barus, Ms. Rayan Mendoza, and Shannon come on down to start. Oh, and Chris, we'll start with 5. And you don't have to speak in the order that you're called.
Good afternoon, Jeremy Barus with Amigos de Guadalupe Center for Justice and Empowerment, and we're here today to urge the council to preserve the $1 million in funding for immigration services, a program with very tangible results. Last budget season, this council made a bold investment, and in today's political climate, we need to meet the moment to make sure our most vulnerable neighbors are protected. As Councilmember Campos mentioned, we had community members send letters because they don't feel comfortable speaking publicly in this political climate. With this funding, we've been able to increase capacity with immigration legal services across 4 agencies. Studies from the Vera Institute show that individuals who have legal representation are 10 times more likely to have a positive outcome on their case. We've already had some great victories where individuals have secured freedom from detention thanks to the work of our attorneys, including one just last week. Fundraising is also a great idea. We're also hoping, like Councilmember Ortiz is doing for the revitalization plan, the city can fundraise for some of these funds, as was discussed in our community meeting with the mayor last year at Mexican Heritage Plaza. Let's invest in the community that invests in us every single day and preserve funding for immigration services. We need to beat the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight I'm here to read the words of a community member who wanted to be here but cannot stand before you tonight due to fears around immigration enforcement. These are her words. To the mayor and honorable council members, I am a community leader from Grupo de Justicia Migratoria, Amigos de Guadalupe, a part of a community that now lives in fear, anguish, and much uncertainty about everything that is happening. I want to express that we feel panicked in these moments. In the community, there are families living with constant terror, fathers and mothers who don't know what would happen tomorrow, children who feel the anguish of their homes. The desperation is affecting us profoundly, emotionally and mentally. I earnestly ask you to prioritize and treat us as an emergency our immigrant communities to complete the remaining half million. This is not just a number. It is hope, it is protection, and it is the possibility that a person will not be separated, that they have access to a lawyer, that we face this crisis with a little more dignity and security.
Thank you. Next speaker. Also, it looks like Heine Gonzalez, come on down. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shannon Zhang, speaking on behalf of the Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits and the Real Coalition. We are excited to see the revised budget principles, particularly the addition of transparency and public engagement. As the city gears up to face a difficult budget deficit, it is critical that the community stays meaningfully engaged as an active partner on how and why budget decisions are made. In addition to these updated principles, we encourage the City Council to center its racial equity commitments outlined in the city charter. Budget decisions are by nature equity decisions. The city has the power to address racial and economic disparities through its fiscal choices. Real Coalition submitted an affordability, racial equity, and stability framework to the city to constructively support its budget decisions in the upcoming months. The residents of San Jose face a significant affordability crisis, including, but not limited to, rising housing, healthcare, childcare, and food costs, which are only deepened by the actions of the federal administration. Real Coalition calls on the city to focus on the challenges its residents face and preserve their ability to remain in San Jose. We thank the council and staff for their hard work, and we look forward to collaborating.
Thank you. Next speaker. Damaris and Guadalupe, come on down. Go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, City Council, Mayor. My name is Misraim Mendoza. I'm here with Amigos de Guadalupe, Center for Justice and Empowerment, and also representing Grupo de Justicia Migratoria. Leaders are very scared to speak up in public, so that's why they send you the letters. I hope you can read them. We send them in our native language, in Spanish. So, I hope you have AI to translate it. I want you to know you guys got difficult decisions to make. Our community has been making those same tough decisions every single day since this administration came into place. Okay, so we all have to make decisions. But the question is, as organizers, we ask, who do you love? Okay, who do you love? And I think I asked you that before. Okay, and your prioritization and this year budget, you need to ask yourself that question. Who do you love? Okay, we cannot afford to have the things that have happened in Minneapolis and in Minnesota happen here. Okay, we cannot afford that to happen. So we need this funding to continue. Okay, we as immigrants, we are not we are not one-time deal. We're here to stay. We permanent. Okay, we're not gonna go nowhere because this is our home. Okay, and it looks like you are very good to raise money because you got $5 million together for events for the Super Bowl. So figure it out, raise the money for immigration legal services, or find them from the investments that you're gonna get out of the Super Bowl. But we need those investments even to go even higher because we don't know what's gonna happen. So please invest in the people that has invested their lives in this city, okay? Because we're not gonna go nowhere. So please, prioritize us in your message, Mayor.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Chris Rodriguez. I work here in San Jose. The central topic today has been the budget shortfall. One thing that I've seen in the budget that I haven't seen discussed is the year after year increases in the police budget. So the police budget in the materials I've seen will be $600 million, much bigger than 5 years ago when it was $500 million. So one of the things that came up repeatedly was efficiency. I'd like to ask you to look at if there's a way to use the police more efficiently and get it back to the lower budget that we had years ago, and then use that savings to fund other worthwhile things like the immigration support that the previous speaker asked for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Heini González. Un placer estar acá con ustedes. Pertenezco al comité TEJER, que trata sobre los trabajadores excluidos por la justicia racial y social del este de San José. Esto es un comité que pertenece a Somos Mayfair,
I
una
belong to the TEJER
organización
committee, which deals with workers excluded by racial and social justice in East San Jose. This is a committee that belongs to
pedimos a ustedes que nos ayuden a realizar una inversión en cuanto a las cooperativas de trabajadores.
We are an organization that supports us, and today we are here because it is important for us to ask you to help us make an investment.
Las cooperativas nos permiten tomar
As for
pasos
worker
firmes
cooperatives, they are meant to create our great true path and generate community wealth and collective well-being.
nuestras familias y nuestros vecindarios. En este momento en el que las familias migrantes
Cooperatives
están
allow
bajo
us to take
ataque,
firm steps to support the economic well-being of all workers, excluding our families and our neighborhoods.
tenemos la oportunidad en este momento de defender
At this
y
time, when
proteger a
migrant
todos
families are
nuestros
under
trabajadores.
attack, it is necessary to take
También
creative,
construir
courageous,
soluciones
and concrete actions.
transformativas que creen un cambio duradero para nuestras futuras generaciones. Es por esto que queremos hacer énfasis.
We
para
have the
que
opportunity
nos
right now to defend and protect all our workers and also build transformative solutions that create lasting change for our future generations.
Thank you. Next
That is why we
speaker.
want to emphasize the need for your support in this great project. Thank you very much for your attention.
tardes,
Have
mi
a good
nombre es Damaris
afternoon.
Estrada.
See you later.
Estoy
Thank you.
aquí
Next
como
speaker.
líder de Somos Mayfair, una organización que trabaja con familias en el este de San José, y quiero resaltar la importancia de apoyar iniciativas en el este de San José donde todos los habitantes tengamos acceso a una vida digna, democrática, sostenible y sana para el bienestar de nuestras familias y nuestra comunidad. Merecemos un nivel de vida digno en el este
Good
de San
afternoon.
José.
My name is
en
Damaris
donde
Estrada.
podamos
I am here as the leader of Somos Mayfair, an organization that works with families in East San Jose, and I want to highlight the importance of supporting initiatives in East San Jose, where all residents have access to a dignified, democratic, sustainable, and healthy life for the well-being of our families and our community. We deserve a decent standard of living in East San Jose where we can rest, play, live fully, and with dignity. It needs to be acknowledged that Silicon Valley has been built on the work of those of us who live in East San Jose. However, the benefits of that prosperity have not flowed to us.
así como realmente lo merecemos. Tengo la oportunidad de trabajar directamente
We
con
ask that you
familias
support
en el
initiatives
este
that
de
give the
San
city of
José
San Jose
y ahora
access to
más
everything
que
we need to
nunca,
thrive and
con
create an East
estos
San
mensajes
Jose,
de
as we
ataques a
truly
nuestras
deserve.
comunidades, hemos visto que necesitamos que ustedes apoyen las iniciativas en que construyamos un este de San José mejor. Muchas gracias.
Speaker?
I have the opportunity to work directly with families in East San Jose, and now more than ever, with these messages attacking our communities, we have seen that we need you to support the initiatives to build a better East San Jose. Thank you so much. Thank you. Next speaker. Good afternoon. I am Guadalupe Perez. I am part of the Knitting Committee, and I represent the Knitting Committee. Knitting means workers excluded by economic and racial justice.
Y trabajadores de cooperativas. Como trabajador excluido,
It is a committee of Somos Mayfair that represents excluded workers, promoters, and cooperative workers. As an excluded worker, I have known.
Por eso, en este momento,
I have experienced firsthand how difficult it is to pay rent and support our families with dignity.
les pedimos que tomen acciones creativas, valientes y concretas. El plan de revitalización es
That is
un
why,
paso
at this moment when immigrant families are under attack, we need to ask you to take creative, courageous, and concrete actions.
Los trabajadores excluidos han aportado al crecimiento económico de esta ciudad, del Valle del Silicio, y no ha fluido la remuneración, la prosperidad y la abundancia hacia estas familias. Es muy importante tener en cuenta
The
siempre que
revitalization
al
plan
final
is a
del
step
día somos
forward.
los trabajadores que
It's a step toward investing in East San Jose because excluded workers have contributed to the economic growth of the Silicon Valley city, and the rewards, prosperity, and abundance haven't flowed to these families. It is very important to always keep in mind that at the end of the day, we, the workers, are the ones who sustain this community and this economy.
para que podamos asegurar la prosperidad, el bienestar, el derecho al descanso y el derecho a estar en paz, a no vivir con la incertidumbre, no solo de inmigración, pero también no vivir con la incertidumbre de cómo voy a pagar mi renta. Merecemos un este de San José que sea
Excluded
próspero,
workers and
donde
cooperative
cada
workers deserve a city that embodies economic justice so that we can ensure prosperity, well-being, the right to rest and the right to be at peace, not to live with the uncertainty not only of immigration, but also not to live with the uncertainty of how I'm going to pay my rent.
Thank you. I want to thank all the members of the community who sat through a long meeting and shared your perspective at the end of it. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Jennifer, Lee, Jim, and Budget Office for all of the preparation for today's meeting and all the other work I know you're doing. And thank you to all of our professional staff for doing some very good and important work out there with limited resources. Look, we will get through this shortfall together. Finally, thank you, colleagues, for all of your feedback. We're adjourned.